Before we jump into this episode, quick reminder that everything said on Bell Curve is a meme and nothing said on Bell Curve is financial advice. Enjoy the app.
That Ethereum's first, their focus has been, okay, well, in order to have any value prop at all as a decentralized application, you need to have all the guarantees of security, censorship resistance, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Cosmos started at the place for, okay, if you want to scale this to 1 billion users, you need to have products that people actually want to use.
All right, guys, welcome to season 3 of Bell Curve. Very excited. We're going to be talking about the AppChain Thesis in season 3. Many of you who are joining us via video know that I have a different co-host, much better looking than my previous co-host, Yano. This is my friend Myles O'Neill. Myles, excited to be doing this season with you.
Great to be here, Mike. Long time coming, and huge fan of the previous seasons you guys have done. So really happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Myles is, the reason I asked Myles to do this is, first of all, he works at, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in a second, Myles, but you currently work at Reverie and are very hands-on with the Cosmos ecosystem and very knowledgeable about the subject matter. But also, for folks in the audience, Myles and I are buds from college, actually. So this is very fortuitous that this worked out.
It's amazing. We've come a long way, buddy.
Yeah.
And proud of everything you've built at Blockworks, and really have enjoyed, seeing you guys grow. So happy to be here.
Maybe we can, as a little Easter egg, if folks stick around for the whole season, we can tell some embarrassing stories about each of us throughout college. There are one or two of those.
No shortage of those.
All right, buddy. I'm honored to be doing this with you as well. Seriously, I don't want to pump your tires too hard, but very, very knowledgeable folks about the Cosmos ecosystem and AppChains, and you were kind of the one who actually first put this on my radar. So before we get into it, can you give a little background for folks about what you're doing at Reverie?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Reverie, we are DAO service providers, and we do a lot of different things depending on the stage of the project. One of the core activities we do is run grants programs, which is really just a catch-all strategic investment budget for DAOs. And so I spend the majority of my time focused on Osmosis grants program. And, with Osmosis, we are doing a combination of, attracting new applications to launch on Osmosis that are complementary to the AMM. We're, funding infrastructure providers, different sort of service providers to come on board, and really just trying to fund things that move the needle for Osmosis. So, it's a very privileged seat. I get to meet a lot of folks across the ecosystem that are building in Cosmos, and I get to, we get to talk with the team quite a bit. And from that, I've my conviction in this AppChain thesis has only grown since we started working on this in, say, April. I can just see firsthand that you can build things that are not possible on monolithic chains. And really enjoyed getting to be a part of some of those initiatives.
Yeah, 100%. And guys, if you've listened to previous seasons and episodes of Bell Curve, we've had Larry and Derek, who are the founders of Reverie, on the show. So big fans of what you guys are all doing. Myles, maybe that's a pretty good lead in. Why don't we talk a little bit about why now, right? We're going to get into the meat of what the AppChain thesis is and sort of our own unique flavor and what we're interested in exploring about it. But why are we doing this season today? What's sort of driving the topical interest?
Yeah, I think we are seeing a lot more, starting with DYDX. I think this really started leading this narrative. We're seeing applications want to vertically integrate in order to provide a better product. And this for DYDX is the fact that they could not fully decentralize on an Ethereum L2. And an order book is very specific, right? This is something that the best version of an order book DEX is one that's built into the chain, right? And this, I think, this narrative has taken off as folks are beginning to see, talk about L3s on top of L2s, right? What owning your own block space, what you can do with that, I think it's a really, really strong narrative. And we're starting to see some of the top applications kind of explore this route. And I think we'll talk about this later, but it does seem to me a little bit that Ethereum and Cosmos are on a bit of a collision course, to this app specific environments.
I In complete agreement. And we'll get into more detail, obviously, even in this episode. But I think one of the ideas that, what I think you have frankly helped me see and understand a little bit more is there's a vein of sort of a narrative in crypto that isn't being fully explored, which is sort of this idea of product maximalism, right? We've had a lot of maximalism in crypto in general. That tends to focus around specific ecosystems or communities or assets. But I think it's very appealing to me to look at the idea of like, look, we've had a lot of stuff happen this past year. Ultimately, if we want to achieve adoption and scale, there is an infrastructure component to that, which frankly, I think the ETH side of the equation is really, really focused on. But then it almost sounds obvious to state like we need to build products that people are ultimately going to want to use, right? And although the AppChain thesis isn't necessarily native to Cosmos, in talking to a lot of the folks in the community, and we're going to have several of them on throughout the course of the season, I think they really approach things from that viewpoint of really wanting to focus on the layer above the sort of consensus data availability layer and like really building apps and products that people want to use.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. I think it's instead of starting with the infrastructure layer, it is starting with the application layer. That is the focus, and the infrastructure will, the application will determine what the infrastructure looks like. I think Ethereum, started with the infrastructure and is now focusing on the app layer. And the apps, as they gain leverage and users, they're going to want to own their own block space. And on Cosmos side, I think they started with the applications first, and the rest of the stack is kind of determined by what can make the best version of this application. You and I are very product maxis, right? We are very product centric mindset here. So that's really what I'm focused on. I believe the users will follow the best products, and if you can build the best product by owning the full stack, or at least more of the stack than you can on a monolithic chain, then you're likely to win out at the end of the day in terms of value accrual.
100%. So I think just to lay out sort of the broad sort of contours of what we're going to be talking about this season, I want to give, make sure we get into it without giving everything away, but giving listeners like an understanding of some of the big concepts and episodes that we're going to cover. And frankly, I think you and I are going into the season kind of with an idea of what we want to talk about or a slant on how we think things might turn out. But I would love it, frankly, if we ended up learning a lot this season and even change some of our viewpoints, right?
100%. And I still have many open questions myself. I think we're going to talk a lot about the benefits of owning your own environment, and owning your own stack potentially. But I think there's a lot of different flavors of AppChains that we will explore. And I think, really understanding the trade-offs across those different flavors is something that I'm still trying to understand. And, I think that's what I'm interested to get out of this season.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let me give listeners sort of there are going to be seven episodes this season. I'm going to give you sort of the TLDR highlight, right, of what these episodes are, and then Myles, maybe I can pick on you a little bit to get in the detail of why we ordered it like this. So, kicking off the season, we're going to be talking about the case for sovereign blockchains, right? And this we've got Dimitri Berenzin from 1KX and Sunny Agrawal, and we're going to be talking about, this is sort of the kicking off the season, talking about what are AppChains, what are the broad sort of contours and ideas about the AppChain thesis, and what is this concept of sovereign blockchains? You've heard about this a lot from sort of the Cosmos ecosystem, but fleshing out what does it mean to be a sovereign blockchain? And then what are some of you were just sort of alluding to this, what are some of the trade-offs and spectrum of being a fully sovereign blockchain versus like being a smart contract on ETH, and like where's the space in between, right? And how are apps going to basically approach that? Next, we're going to go into sort of this idea of fat apps and aggregation theory in crypto, which is, it's almost flipping on its head the very popular idea, which was sort of pioneered by Joel Monegro, and I think still largely accepted by crypto writ large, which is fat protocols, right? Value is going to accrue to the protocol layer at the base, whereas I think a lot of people in the Cosmos ecosystem believe it's going to be the opposite of that, in mirror dynamics that we've seen in Web 2, where value is going to accrue to the top layer because they have the closest relationship to the consumer. After that, we're going to go on to, this is a working title, but call it competing security models for app chains, right? This is alluding to this idea that you were mentioning, that there's sort of two approaches here, which is the apps and products that users are going to interact with, but then there are layers different, there's like a consensus and data availability layer, and stuff kind of underneath. And there are different models. Like there's sort of an Ethereum approach, a Celestia approach. There's some interesting things going on with EigenLayer, and there's kind of like a Cosmos sort of approach. So we're going to be exploring what are some of the different architectures that go underneath and support applications. Next, we're going to be talking about MEV and how that's not only a driver of the business model for DeFi and blockchains, but how that actually pushes, how that might be tailwinds for the AppChain thesis. We're going to be talking to a couple of AppChain pioneers, hopefully, some of the leaders at DYDX and actually Compound when they almost made the decision to migrate. We're going to be talking about where Ethereum and Cosmos intersect. So really diving deep into what you were talking about, kind of ETH and Cosmos converging on the same viewpoint from different starting angles. And then we're just going to be talking about a roadmap going forward for like, when is this likely to happen and what's the market structure going to look like and timelines. So that was a pretty broad thesis, and I just heard myself talk for a long time. Like, why did we decide to start with this kind of what does it mean to be a sovereign blockchain, and kind of starting from the Cosmos side of things?
Yeah, I think it's all about what can you do as a sovereign blockchain that you cannot do when built as a smart contract application on a general purpose chain. And I think that's a great starting point, because that's really what gets people interested in this, and this was what gets application developers excited about the AppChain thesis. And I think it hits on all parts of the application, from performance to UX, through the customizability that you have, value capture, which can then reinforce better UX through better business models, so you have more at your disposal to invest in further growth. And I think from there you can understand, okay, here are the range of benefits I get. Now, what is the trade-off space between a roll-up that's app specific versus a full stack app chain, and how much of those benefits do you get across these different flavors of app chains?
And it seems to be more and more topical as well, because there are a bunch of apps that are launching on not Ethereum main chain. We've got layer 2s, right, that are making block space that inherit the security benefits of ETH more cheap, right, and therefore accessible. But now that we've solved sort of the cost, right, and throughput, or are starting to solve that from the ETH ecosystem, we're sort of running up into the logical limits of the execution layer, right? So it seems that's also, to me, like, that's pretty timely, right? And I think you have some pretty nuanced thinking, and we're going to be exploring this season. Like, look, we're going to be kind of extolling the benefits, or exploring deeply the benefits of owning the full stack for your chain, but it's ultimately not going to make sense for a lot of chains, at least to start off with. Right. So I think we're going to be trying to put ourselves in the shoes of builders and explore, where does it really make sense? When does it make sense?
100%. Because there are, very considerable trade-offs, right? And I think every application developer needs to make this decision in thinking about, within the context of their own application, how much do these trade-offs matter, and how much the benefits, what is the magnitude of the benefits versus, the potential trade-offs. And I think, we will see, a lot of larger, it kind of depends on how much leverage you have with users, and what stage of maturity you are on to, potentially fully vertically integrate versus, maybe vertically integrate just a part of the stack. And so, yeah, I think it will be interesting and to talk to some of these builders, about how they made these decisions. And talk to builders that are, potentially exploring this now. I think we starting to hear, more and more interest, especially from the Ethereum community, of really, being able to own your own block space, curate what is in it. And we'll see just how this plays out. We're talking about L3s these days on top of rollups. That's another really interesting angle to explore. So, absolutely, we're going to put ourselves in the shoes of a builder and try to imagine these trade-offs from their perspective.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the idea of sort of fat apps, right? This is actually, we've got Sunny sort of kicking the season off, but I've heard him talk about this sort of at length, which is, this was the Joel Monegro from Placeholder sort of thesis that, ultimately, if you look at the returns of layer ones like Ethereum or Bitcoin, that far outpaced what you would consider sort of the app layer. He was actually comparing it, I believe, in his original piece to Coinbase, and the returns on equity for Coinbase and Bitcoin outstrip that. So I think we'd like to sort of gently challenge that, throughout this season and sort of explore the trade-offs of, like, obviously this is all going to play out in real time, but where value does accrue, because it's certainly the opposite dynamic in Web 2.
Yeah, 100%. And really, I think Sunny calls it either fat apps or tall apps. I like tall apps when just thinking about the stack, right? And I think the perspective, that I've heard him speak about before, which I think really resonated with me, is that when you think about, the early development of the internet, the consensus bets early on were really around the infrastructure layers like AOL. When in reality, value accrued to the application layers because they owned the users. And then it ended up actually being Google and Amazon that then built the infrastructure, right? And starting at the application layer, and getting as close as possible to the users, it will allow you to have, maximum flexibility later to build out, other parts of the stack. And your users will come with you, right? Applications are far more sticky than blockchains. So, I think we're trying to take a long-term perspective here, and imagining, tons of users using decentralized on-chain applications and really what the stack might look like for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the reason I think it's important to get this episode at the top of the season is it's sort of a fundamental reorienting, right, of your perspective. I think many people implicitly kind of actually agree with the Fat protocol thesis in this space because, frankly, the L1s are what have performed really well as an investment. They have the largest communities around it. And I think you and I want to challenge that and turn it on its head and say, actually, from a logical perspective, right, historically, the closer to the customer you are, the more leverage you have sort of down the chain. And you were talking about, tech and Web 2, but this exists. This exists in the automotive supply chain, right? This exists in finance. This is a dynamic that has been replicated across multiple different industries. And I think that sets us up for like the next episode, which is where we're going to have representatives from, sort of these different, let's call it like architectural sorts of models, like underneath, like infrastructure providers. And once you look at it from the perspective of, okay, maybe leverage is going to exist on the app chain and everything underneath is going to be commoditized, it's just a fundamental reorganizing for, okay, let's take that perspective and then say, what are the different architectures for how we're going to achieve, all consensus data availability, all the things that need to happen underneath the apps.
Right. I mean, I think the value of L1s is really driven by the quality of applications built on top. And really, speculating about the future applications that will be built on top. I think as those applications actually get larger and gain more traction and potentially mainstream adoption, they will then have the leverage to be able to take the users where they want, in order to make the best possible product. And, whether that is on their own app specific rollup or full stack app chain, or, maybe it's an evolution, right? As they mature and as they grow, and, the market continues to grow, there will be incentives to vertically integrate, just as we see, with any traditional company.
It's probably like good to explore, right? So what are the things that could disprove what we're talking about here thus far, right? There are definitely some disadvantages to app chains tonight, that app chain sort of viewpoint. I know you're familiar. You want to walk through some of them that we have kind of going into the season for why we might be wrong?
Again, I think just to list off a few, right? I think it is a greater cost, right? You have to provide your own security. You have to bootstrap your own validator set. This is for the full stack, Cosmos sovereign app chain. And that may not make sense, right? From day one, when you're trying to iterate quickly and find PMF. It's just the general cost and time to develop is right now one of the challenges. Another one is really, around, I would say, having the entire stack controlled by governance, I think is another underappreciated trade-off here. I don't think it's really, we're very close to it at Reverie. And it's not impossible. It hasn't we haven't seen it slow down applications, app chains quite yet, but but there are a lot of stakeholders, right? Across when you own every single layer of the stack, and frankly, it can be challenging. And I think the other big one is probably even more important is around the interoperability piece. And to me, this is a big question because I think composability has been, one of the main value props of DeFi, especially early on. But when we think about traditional finance, I mean, these applications, fintechs don't run on a single computer, right? They all depend on async composability. So I think exploring really what is the best version of composability that you could have while it's still in your own, app chain or app specific roll up. And just how, strong are those trade-offs against, actually having everything live in the same place, like a Solana or like an Ethereum layer one.
Right. Composability, it's an interesting concept because it even goes beyond the AppChain thesis. But if you look at sort of both of the more mainstream sort of consensus approaches to how we're going to scale, people are basically on board with the modular thesis, right? But layer twos, they sort of break or make composability much more difficult, or at least atomic composability.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that we also need to think about, all right, for this AppChain thesis to play out, what sort of infrastructure needs to be built, right? And right now, I think that's where Cosmos is way ahead of Ethereum, because they really started from this place of thinking about if every chain is going to be their own application, the most important thing we can build is one, interoperability standard that is shared between all the chains and that is as secure as possible, right? So that is IBC. So if we're going to see something similar play out on the Ethereum side, what does that look like? Is it IBC itself that's being ported over and then, all these chains can talk to each other? Or is it, more local, specialized, interoperability solutions? So I think that's another part of this season is saying, okay, we understand all the benefits. What needs to be built in order to actually get the best version of this?
Yeah. I'd be curious, we're going to be talking to a lot of the folks from sort of the core Cosmos community, right? And then there's also sort of a different, right? It emerged from Cosmos. It's Celestia, right? As a chain and as a viewpoint. They, while they sort of sit somewhat in the Cosmos ecosystem, is definitely a different approach, right? Like, to use a really simple heuristic, right? If Cosmos is an internet of blockchains, then Celestia is an internet of modular blockchains, right? Whereas Cosmos sort of advocates the full stack, whereas Celestia has both the AppChain sort of thesis, but they also advocate a modular approach.
Right. I think as you go, I view the spectrum as Cosmos, Celestia, and then Ethereum on the other side. And I think, on the for Celestia and Ethereum, the commonality between them is they are sharing some sort of, security or data availability solution at the very bottom of the stack. Right. And I think understanding what are the trade-offs between owning that full stack versus, sharing some portion of it, right, is really interesting and still, a lot of open questions there because we frankly, have not seen what these modular app specific roll-ups look like. And I'm very excited to see what applications can be built. But, I think at least exploring the trade-offs right now is the best we can do.
Yeah. I think one big idea that we want to explore this season as well is where do, especially like Cosmos as an ecosystem and Ethereum as an ecosystem, collide, right? Or we see them sort of on this course where they're starting to bump up against each other. And they're to not put, I'll, say what I think and then you can kind of correct me, but it seems like they're trying to solve the same basic vision of scaling, right, crypto to billions of people. ETH is approaching from sort of the consensus data availability security layer. Cosmos is approaching from the we need to build products people want to use type layer. There was a pretty interesting paper you actually highlighted to me about potentially implementing IBC on ETH. I think it was layer twos, right? So that they could at least do like contract calls or basically sharing some amount of data in between each other. So I'd be curious, like, I know we're going to explore where these two communities bump into each other, but like, how do you see them sort of interacting over the coming years?
Yeah, I think, you're totally right. They're both coming from the same place and that, we want to scale, decentralized applications to billions of users. And I think that Ethereum's first, their focus has been, okay, well, in order to have any value prop at all as a decentralized application, you need to have all the guarantees of security, censorship resistance, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Cosmos started at the place for, okay, if you want to scale this to 1 billion users, you need to have products that people actually want to use. And I'm not to say that, application developers on Ethereum don't believe that. I think they very much so do. But I think where these two are on a collision course is some of these applications on Ethereum realizing, okay, we are past the bootstrapping phase. What do we need to do to really, improve this product to reach, the next level of adoption? And I think that they will start, at least the apps with the most leverage will start heading towards some sort of app specific environment on that side, right? So I think people are starting to realize that general purpose permissionless L2s like Arbitrum and Optimism at the end of the day are not all that different than general purpose permissionless L1s, apart from lower fees. I think the applications that, really get mainstream adoption on a general purpose L2 will soon find that, they, first of all, to improve the user experience, to get even closer to the user, that they will want to, go to their own environment. So I think that's the collision course. I think, the interoperability standards on the Ethereum side are going to be very interesting to see how they play out. And I think we'll be talking to a few folks that are working on that. So very excited about that.
Same. Well, maybe to sort of wrap here, I think one of the things that knowing that no one has a crystal ball and this is all very difficult to predict. We're recording this actually on January 13th, Friday the 13th. But we're also sitting in the depths of a bear market here, right? So it's very difficult to sort of see a through line to what catalyst is going to take us out and what the timeline is and all that sort of stuff. But it'd be great to get sort of ideas about magnitude here, right? Like, let's say at the end of this season, having recorded 6 episodes, we're very bullish. We understand the benefits of the AppChain thesis. We think at least some amount of market share is going to accrue to this particular architecture. Yep. Is this like 50% of the biggest apps eventually end up having their own full stack chain? Is it less? Are there specific types of apps or sectors, right, that are actually would benefit more from this particular architecture? How do we think about some of those sort of directional ideas?
I think you have to think about your own application and how important is composability for your application, right? As a lending protocol, it's incredibly important. You need to be sitting in the same environment as a DEX normally for your protocol to actually function efficiently. As a gaming application, you might require less security, right, than say a financial application like a DEX or a lending protocol. And so the trade-offs around having maybe a smaller security budget and a lower cost of attack may not actually be as strong of a trade-off for you versus a DeFi protocol, right? And so I think one thing that is a big catalyst for this is the fall of all these CeFi exchanges and lending providers. I think there's a lot of users that are looking for an experience and an offering that matches or is as close as possible to matching that CeFi experience, while getting all the benefits of a decentralized application so that they know they cannot be rugged, or at least they have the ability to check to see if they're being rugged, right? And I think that is one of the biggest catalysts, I think, for AppChains is that, the closest version you can get to, FTX on chain is probably going to be an AppChain. And so, that could be a catalyst, but it's a different equation for every single app. And it really also depends on the stage of maturity.
Yeah. I think it also depends on how core MEV is to your business model as well. We haven't really talked about the intersection of MEV. Dan Elitzer wrote a pretty thought-provoking piece, right, on, he called it Unichain is Inevitable. And it was a little bit of a, marketing forward sort of title, but he made some really good points in that a lot of the economics basically that Uniswap generates are being captured by ETH, the main chain, and eventually Uniswap is going to try to take greater control on the execution layer, but they're also going to want to capture more economics. And at least my personal opinion is there's going to be a strong fee preference that gets expressed not for upfront swap fees, but for more invisible fees. And I think MEV ends up sort of representing that. So
yeah, and I do think it also, like when speaking about MEV, this plays into UX as well, right? If you think about Uniswaps, I think Dan laid it out. The three costs for Uniswap users are gas fees, which, or I should start with the swap fee. That one accrues to at least Uniswap stakeholders. Gas fees, all of that goes to, the leaks to the L1. And then of course there's the MEV piece, which all of that leaks to the L1. The first two, of costs there, gas fees and swap fees, those are rent seeking, sorts of revenue, right? That does not improve the user experience. And so I think, by harnessing MEV as a business model, you can also improve the user experience by decreasing reliance on those sort of rent seeking activities. And as an app chain, you can be very opinionated about what sort of MEV you will allow, and you can be very opinionated about how that revenue is captured and how it's distributed. And so, I think when we talk about business models here, I do want to like pull it back to the actual product itself. I think we'll explore that more in episodes to come. But to me, it's, MEV for AppChains is one of the most exciting and interesting, aspects of this conversation.
Completely agree. All right, buddy. It's going to be a fascinating season. Really excited to do this with you. We've got, just to plug our first episode, we're going to be going live with Sunny and Dimitri next week. So yeah, guys, tune in. Should be a ton of fun. Myles, excited to explore this with you.
Yeah, I'm pumped, buddy. This will be fun.